I was driving home late that afternoon, the sun dipping low over the fields, painting everything in this soft golden glow. It was late May, and the air smelled like fresh grass and wildflowers, typical for this time of year around here. My old car rattled along the back road, the one I take to avoid the traffic after a long shift at the diner. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than usual, my mind still stuck on the argument I had with my boss earlier. Then out of nowhere, a sharp noise hit my ears, something between a yelp and a cry. My foot slammed on the brake, tires screeching as the car jolted to a stop. I sat there for a second, heart pounding, trying to figure out what I'd hit. Peering through the windshield, I saw them. 2 tiny lynx cubs, their fur a messy mix of gray and brown, sitting right in front of my left front tire. One was huddled close to the ground, its big round eyes locked on me, while the other stood wobbly, its hind leg bent at an odd angle. I threw the door open and stumbled out, my boots hitting the gravel hard. They didn't run. They just stared, those eyes piercing through me like they were begging for something I couldn't yet understand. I dropped to my knees, keeping my distance at first, not wanting to scare them off. Up close, I could see the dirt matted in their fur, the way the injured one's leg trembled. They couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, way too small to be out here alone. My chest tightened. Where was their mom? I glanced around, scanning the empty road and the edge of the woods, but there was no sign of anything. Just the hum of crickets and the distant call of a bird. These little guys were in trouble, and I knew I couldn't just drive away. I reached for my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight, thinking maybe I could call someone, animal control, a friend, anyone. But the signal was dead out here as usual. The healthy cub let out a weak mew, inching closer to my shoe, its nose sniffing the air. The injured one stayed put, panting softly, its eyes half closed. I couldn't leave them. Not like this. I pulled off my jacket, moving slow, and wrapped it around the healthy one first. It squirmed but didn't fight me. Then I scooped up the other, careful not to jostle its leg. Both fit in my arms, light as feathers, their warmth seeping through the fabric. Getting back in the car was a mess. I had to balance them on the passenger seat, propping my jacket into a makeshift nest. They stayed quiet, watching me with those intense gazes. I turned the key, the engine sputtering to life, and started toward home, my mind racing. What was I doing? I didn't know the first thing about wild animals. My little apartment wasn't set up for this. But every time I glanced over, seeing those tiny faces, I knew I couldn't turn back. I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickering on as dusk settled in. Neighbors' windows glowed yellow, but I didn't want to explain this to anyone yet. I carried the cubs inside, setting them on the kitchen floor. They huddled together, the injured one leaning against the other. I grabbed a bowl, filled it with water, and set it down, watching as the healthy one lapped at it weakly. The other just lay there, breathing shallow. My hands shook as I dialed the vet's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Office hours were over. I sank onto the floor beside them, running a hand through my hair. What now? I didn't have supplies, didn't know if they'd make it through the night. The healthy one nudged my leg, its tiny paw brushing my jeans. I couldn't help but smile, even with the panic bubbling up. These little fighters weren't giving up, and neither could I. I grabbed an old blanket from the couch, folding it into a bed for them near the heater. Tomorrow I'd figure this out, find a vet, get help. But for now, I sat there, watching them, wondering what I'd stumbled into. Last night stretched on forever. I sat on the kitchen floor, the blanket I'd folded for the lynx cubs, still warm under them, but my nerves were shot. The healthy one, let's call him Rusty for now, with that reddish tint in his fur, kept pacing a little, sniffing around my feet. The injured one, who I started thinking of a shadow because of his darker patches, lay still, his breathing so faint it scared me. I'd managed to get Rusty to drink some water, but Shadow wouldn't touch it. His leg looked worse up close, swollen, twisted, and he whimpered every time he shifted. I didn't sleep, couldn't, just kept watching them, my heart pounding every time Shadow's eyes fluttered shut. By morning, I was a wreck, eyes burning, hands shaky from coffee I'd chugged at 3 a.m. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. First thing, I tried calling the vet again, but no answer. The clock ticked past 8, and I figured I'd need help before I lost my mind. My neighbor Tom lives 2 houses down, a gruff guy who's always tinkering with his truck. I grabbed my jacket, told myself to stay calm, and walked over, the cubs safe in my kitchen with the door locked. Tom was out front, wiping grease off his hands, his old dog barking at me from the porch. I explained everything fast, how I found the cubs, how Shadow might not make it. His face hardened as I talked. He wiped his hands on his jeans and shook his head. Tom said it plain. Those are wild animals. Emily, you can't keep them. He suggested I dump them back in the woods or call animal control to deal with it. His words hit like a punch. I stood there, feeling the weight of his indifference, and mumbled something about trying the vet instead. He just shrugged and turned back to his engine. Walking home, my chest felt tight. The sun was up now, birds chirping like nothing was wrong, but all I could think was how wrong Tom was. I couldn't abandon them. Back inside, I found Rusty nudging Shadow, trying to get him to move. I knelt down, stroking Rusty's head. He didn't pull away, and checked Shadow's leg again. It was hot to the touch, and he let out a weak cry that broke me. I grabbed my keys, decided the vet was my next stop, no matter what. I rigged a box with towels, carefully lifting both cubs inside. Rusty stayed still, but Shadow's weight felt too light, like he was slipping away. The drive to the clinic took 20 minutes, every bump making me wince. I kept talking to them, stupid stuff like, "Hang on guys, we're almost there," just to fill the silence. The parking lot was empty when I pulled up, and I carried the box inside, my arms aching. The vet, Sarah, met me at the counter. She's this no-nonsense woman with gray streaks in her hair, always straight with you. She took one look at Shadow and her face tightened. They whisked him to the back, Rusty too, and I paced the waiting room, staring at the chipped paint on the walls. Sarah came out after what felt like hours, gloves still on. She said Shadow had a broken leg and dehydration, could be infection setting in. Rusty was stressed but okay. She wasn't sure Shadow would pull through. That hit me hard. I thought about my mom, how she'd nursed a stray dog back to health years ago, her hands steady while mine shook now. I told Sarah I'd pay anything, do anything, just save him. She nodded, said they'd keep them overnight, run tests. I left the clinic with an empty box, my mind spinning. Driving home, I passed the spot where I'd found them, the road quiet except for the wind. Back at the house, I sat on the couch, staring at the blanket they'd been on. The silence was loud. I kept seeing Shadow's weak eyes, Rusty's trust. Tomorrow, I'd call Sarah for updates, but tonight, I just sat there, wondering if I'd done enough. The clock ticked past midnight, and I knew sleep wouldn't come easy. Those cubs had gotten under my skin, and I wasn't sure I could let go, no matter what happened next. The next morning came too fast. I'd barely slept, my mind stuck on Rusty and Shadow, wondering if they'd made it through the night at the vet clinic. I'd already been to Sarah's office yesterday, leaving them there after she told me about Shadow's broken leg and dehydration. Her words kept replaying in my head, how she wasn't sure he'd pull through. I couldn't lose him, not after everything. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and headed back to the clinic, the spring air cool against my skin as I stepped outside. The drive felt longer this time, my hands sweaty on the wheel. I kept picturing Shadow's tiny body, how limp he'd been when I handed him over. When I walked into the clinic, Sarah was already at the front, looking over some charts. She waved me to the back room where the cubs were. Rusty was curled in a small crate, his eyes brighter than yesterday, but Shadow was on a table, hooked 2 and 4, a little bandage wrapped around his injured leg. Sarah adjusted her glasses and pointed at him. She said they'd stabilized him overnight, but the infection was worse than she thought. The next 48 hours would decide everything. I stepped closer, my throat tight. Shadow's breathing was steadier, but he looked so fragile, his tiny chest rising and falling under the fluorescent lights. Rusty mewed softly from his crate, like he knew something was wrong. I asked Sarah what I could do. She said they needed to stay here for a few days, 4 fluids, antibiotics, maybe surgery if Shadow's leg didn't improve. I nodded, trying to keep it together, and told her to do whatever it took. I didn't care about the cost. I just wanted them to live. Sitting there, watching Sarah check Shadow's vitals, I couldn't help but think of my mom. She passed away 2 years ago, but she'd always been the one to take in strays, cats, dogs, even a rabbit once. I remembered her sitting on our porch, feeding a skinny dog she'd found, her hands gentle but firm. She'd tell me, "Emily, if you can save one life, You've done something big. I felt her with me now, pushing me to keep going. I looked at Shadow, his little paw twitching, and promised myself I wouldn't give up on him. Sarah said I could visit any time, but for now they needed rest. I left the clinic with a heavy heart, promising to call later. The rest of the day dragged. I went to work at the diner, but I was distracted, spilling coffee twice and messing up orders. My boss, Linda, pulled me aside and asked what was wrong. I told her about the cubs, how I couldn't stop worrying. She softened a bit, said I could leave early if I needed to. I thanked her and headed straight to the park near my house, needing air. Sitting on a bench, watching kids play on the swings, I kept checking my phone for updates. The spring breeze rustled the trees, but it didn't calm me. I couldn't shake the image of Shadow on that table, or Rusty looking so small in his crate. 2 days passed like that, me going back and forth to the clinic, bringing Rusty little toys to keep him busy while Shadow fought to get better. Sarah said Rusty was eating now, which was a good sign, but Shadow still wouldn't. On the 3rd day, I was at home, scrubbing dishes to keep my hands busy, when my phone rang. It was Sarah. My stomach dropped as I answered, expecting the worst. She said Shadow's fever had broken, but his leg wasn't healing right. They'd need to do surgery soon, or he might never walk properly. She needed my okay to go ahead. It'd be expensive, and there were risks. I froze, the sponge dripping in my hand, my mind racing. I thought of my mom again, how she'd never hesitated to help an animal in need. I took a deep breath and told Sarah to do it. Hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the blanket where the cubs had slept that first night. I didn't know if I'd made the right call, but I knew I couldn't let Shadow down. Not now. I just hoped he was strong enough to pull through whatever came next. A few days after I gave Sarah the okay for Shadow's surgery, I headed back to the clinic, my stomach in knots. It was a sunny morning, late May, the kind of day where the air feels warm but not heavy yet. I'd been checking in daily since leaving Rusty and Shadow there, and Sarah had good news yesterday. Shadow made it through the surgery. His leg was pinned, and he'd need time, but he was eating again. Rusty was doing better too, gaining strength. I walked in, and Sarah met me with a tired smile. She led me to the back, where the cubs were resting in a bigger crate together. Rusty perked up when he saw me, nudging Shadow, who lifted his head slowly. I couldn't help but grin, relief washing over me. But then Sarah sat me down, her face turning serious. She said she'd done some digging with a local wildlife group. They'd had reports of a female lynx hit by a car on the same road where I found the cubs, just a few days before I spotted them. The timing lined up. Sarah looked at me, her voice soft. She thinks that was their mom. My heart sank. I sat there, staring at the cubs, their big eyes watching me back. It hit me hard. They weren't just lost. They were orphans, clinging to my car because they had nowhere else to go, no one else to protect them. I left the clinic in a daze, telling Sarah I'd be back soon. I needed to see that spot on the road for myself. I drove out, the same back road I'd taken that night, my hands tight on the wheel. The fields stretched out on either side, wildflowers dotting the grass, but I barely noticed. I pulled over near the spot where I'd first seen Rusty and Shadow, my boots crunching on the gravel as I got out. I walked along the shoulder, scanning the ground. Then I saw it, a patch of matted fur caught on a bush, bloodstains faded into the dirt. Nearby, tire marks scarred the pavement. I knelt down, my fingers brushing the fur, and felt my throat tighten. Their mom didn't stand a chance. I sat there for a while, the wind rustling through the trees, trying to process it. Those cubs had watched their mom die, probably hid in the bushes until they couldn't anymore. My car must have been the first thing they saw that felt safe. I wiped my eyes, stood up, and made a promise to them right then. I'd find them a real home, somewhere they could grow up safe. They couldn't stay with me forever, and the wild was too dangerous for them now. Back at home, I started making calls. I found a wildlife rehab center about an hour away, up in the mountains. They specialized in animals like lynxes, helping them recover and eventually return to the wild. I got through to a woman named Claire, who sounded kind but cautious. She said they might have space, but they'd need to assess the cubs first. Shadow's injury complicated things. I told her their story, how I'd found them, what they'd been through. She listened quietly, then said she'd need to see vet records and talk to her team. I sent over everything Sarah had given me, my hands shaking as I hit send. The next day, I went to the diner for my shift, trying to focus, but my mind was on the cubs. I kept checking my phone between orders, hoping for a call from Claire. My coworker, Jake, noticed I was off. He asked if I was okay, and I told him about the cubs, how I was trying to find them a place. He nodded, said he'd heard about that rehab center. They did good work. It made me feel a little better, but the waiting was killing me. That evening, I was at home, feeding my cat Muffin, when my phone finally rang. I dropped the food bowl, startling Muffin, and grabbed it. It was Claire. She said they reviewed everything, and they could take Rusty and Shadow, but there was a catch. They'd need to be transported soon, and I'd have to cover some of the initial costs. I didn't care about the money. I told her I'd make it work, my voice cracking with relief. As I hung up, I looked at the blanket on the floor, the one the cubs had slept on that first night. They were getting a chance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that letting them go would be harder than I thought. A week later, I woke up early, the sun just peeking over the horizon. It was Friday, May 16th, and the air outside my window carried that crisp late spring feel. Today was the day I'd take Rusty and Shadow to the rehab center. I'd spent the last few days getting everything ready, packing their crate with blankets, making sure Shadow's leg brace was secure, and gathering the paperwork Claire needed. My hands shook as I loaded the car, the cubs nestled inside. They'd grown a bit since I found them, Rusty more playful, Shadow stronger, though he still limped. Leaving them felt like letting go of a piece of myself, but I knew it was the right move. The drive to the mountains took an hour, winding roads cutting through green hills. I kept glancing back, watching Rusty press his nose to the crate's edge while Shadow rested against him. Sarah had called yesterday, saying Shadow's surgery was holding up, and both cubs were eating well. It eased my nerves a little, but my chest still ached. When I pulled into the center's gravel lot, a wooden sign read, Wild Haven Rehab. Claire met me outside, her gray hair tied back, a clipboard in hand. She opened the crate, checking the cubs with gentle hands. Rusty squirmed, but Shadow stayed calm, his eyes meeting mine. Inside, the center was a bustle of activity, volunteers feeding deer, cleaning cages. Claire led me to a pen where the cubs would stay. It had soft bedding, a water bowl, and a high fence for safety. She said they'd start a slow rehab process, building Shadow's strength, teaching them to hunt again. I set the crate down, watching as they explored, Rusty pouncing on a toy while Shadow tested his leg. They looked so alive, and it hit me how far they'd come. But my throat tightened as Claire started explaining the next steps. They might never fully return to the wild if Shadow's leg didn't heal right. I knelt by the pen, letting Rusty sniff my hand one last time. Shadow limped over, pressing against the fence, and I felt tears sting my eyes. These little guys had been through hell, losing their mom, clinging to my car, fighting to survive. I thought of my mom, how she'd smile seeing me here, doing what she taught me. She'd be proud, I knew it. I whispered to them, "You're safe now," and stood up, wiping my face. Claire patted my shoulder, saying I'd given them a shot at life. I nodded, but walking away felt heavy. The drive home was quiet, just the hum of the engine in my thoughts. I passed the spot where I'd found them, the road empty now, and pictured their mom's fur in the bushes. Back at my house, I fed Muffin, then sat on the couch, staring at the blanket they'd slept on. The place felt emptier without their tiny paws pattering around. I called Sarah later, and she said the center would update me on their progress. Hearing that brought a small smile. By evening, I stepped outside, the sky turning pink over the fields. I felt a strange peace, knowing Rusty and Shadow were cared for. But a question lingered. Would they ever run free again, or would Shadow's leg hold them back? I didn't have the answer, and maybe that was okay. They'd given me something too. Purpose. A connection to my mom's memory. I took a deep breath, watching the stars blink on, and let the uncertainty sit with me, a quiet hope in my heart.